All right, so good afternoon. This is the July 17th meeting of the Budget Task Force Benchmarking and Efficiency Subcommittee. The first matter on the agenda is to review and approve the minutes from July 12th. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion or comments on the minutes? All right, all those in favor, Valerie,
Aye.
Jenny,
Aye.
Amy, you're a non-voting, right? And then Christina?
Aye.
And Kristen, aye. All right, so we are going to meet today to flesh out some more information about the questions that we're going to ask departments, as well as other municipalities. And then if there's anything last minute to talk about before Wednesday, we're going to meet just as the full group on Wednesday, no subcommittees, to prepare for the Budget Task Force Forum and future meetings. So I know I had gotten some answers. I think, Christina, you were collecting some questions from members, and then I got some questions from Tom, Clay, and Shayna on what they might want us to ask. So Christina, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So Jenny, oh shoot, I'm frozen. So can you guys still hear me? Okay,
Yeah,
I'm going to stop
we
my
can hear
video
you.
and see if that works, but I'll just keep talking. So I did get some feedback from Jenny. That was all the feedback that I got. So if I can, hang on. Kristen had started a document with some questions in it, and it's in the OneDrive. I added to it for different areas, for different departments, a little more specific questions. I don't know if, Kristen, if you, I can share my screen if you want. I could share that and we can look at it together. Or do we want to go through the data and see if anyone has anything else? I don't know, what would be most helpful for people?
It looks like some of these are generic and then some that you got from the data, right? So
Right.
to me, like if I had time, sorry, I didn't get back to you. If I had time to look at it, I feel like I would have looked at the data either simultaneously or first.
Yeah.
And then like looked at library and saw what your questions were and decided if I had any additional reflections. So
Okay.
I think sharing the data and talking through how you got to your questions may
Sure.
help trigger someone else to think, what about this?
Yep.
Just my thought.
Let me bring that up and then I can share that. Okay, so that you should be seeing the spreadsheet now. So if we start with library, I don't think I can get all of the municipalities. I'll have to scroll a little bit. I don't know, just to sort of recap, what I did was I went through all of the municipalities' budgets and filled in these columns. Can you see my mouse move, my cursor moving if I'm pointing to things? Okay, good to know.
Yes.
So I filled in their library FTEs. I then calculated how many FTEs per 1,000 residents, just to try to normalize it in some way. I did end up breaking out their personnel versus expenses costs. I started to do building costs because some of the towns include their building, like maintenance, electricity, all of that kind of stuff in let's say their library budget and some don't. Really all I did was break out ours and figuring we can subtract or, keep that in if we want. And then this is the total FY24 budget for each of these towns, the cost per resident and the percent of their total budget.
Christina, is it okay? I know when we share screens, it's hard to see faces. So I don't want to interrupt you, but I also want to jump in with questions as you're talking.
Yep. Go right ahead.
Can you just talk about, again, sorry, so expenses versus building money? What's the difference there?
So the expenses are, how like the budgets are usually broken down into sort of salary and other expenses, right? So that's what that initial breakdown is just salary expenses, any other expenses. What I found was that a lot of towns pull all of their building maintenance, their utilities, sometimes even custodial costs for a particular building out of their budget, and they have it in like a public facilities or public buildings budget. I didn't go back. What I should have done is gone back and sort of highlighted which ones did that and which ones didn't. I didn't. The only thing I got to was pulling our number out of there.
And how does Westford do it? Do we do it? We don't have a public building department, right?
So we're a little sort of half and half. Some of our buildings are pulled out into the facilities department, but in particular, the library is not. So this is our library building cost, is this $71,000. Yeah, and I just added up all the different things. But what I didn't do is I didn't subtract it from the expenses line yet. I'm sort of in mid-thought on this. So all I did was pull out our expenses so that if, let's say, we went and looked at, I'm just going to pick a name out of random, let's say Acton didn't have their costs in here, then we could subtract our 71,000 from this and know that we're at least comparing expenses to expenses. Do you know what I mean? If that makes sense?
Yep. I hear.
But I didn't kind of completely finish that. So this is a little in flux because I wasn't sure if it was worth going to that level or not.
So when you did dollar per resident, that's column G, the total budget for this department?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I almost think, okay, sorry, dollar per resident. Yes. Okay.
So does that mean the total fiscal year 24's budget for library, including the salary expenditure and also like a building repairs and maintenance, they combine together equal to fiscal year 24's budget?
It might, depending on the town.
Okay.
That was sort of yeah.
So you got them from places that made you feel like this is the library's total budget, this is the library's personnel budget, this is the expenses budget, but you don't know if there's some sort of other invisible costs in there.
So when I was going through their budgets, I did know, but I did not note that here. But for the most part, like when I was looking through, like Acton's FY24 budget, this was their personnel cost, this is their expenses cost. I would have had to have looked a little bit, and at the time I probably did know, look a little bit closer and say, does this include their building maintenance costs? And in fact, if you look over to public buildings, so for Acton, since their public buildings and facility
Sorry, I'll be right back.
Yep, are 1.5 million. I'm pretty sure they pull all of their building costs into this number. So this 1.6 does not include their building costs, whereas ours does. Again, where ours was like 70,000, I wouldn't be able to determine what theirs was because they don't break it down that far. I just know that this doesn't include that figure. So I think that's where I also was like, is this really going to get me anywhere, or is it so little that maybe it's not worth really looking at.
Amy, were you going to say something? I think you're on mute.
Oh yeah, I know. I feel like the deeper we go, the more of these instances we're finding. And I feel like we could do this all day. And where do we want to stop? Because I feel like Christina's eyes are gonna need to be replaced.
Which is kind of exactly why I stopped doing the building things. I was
Yeah.
like, all right, am I just going down a rabbit hole that we're just gonna keep doing? And are we just at a point where we come back up for air, maybe talk to Ellen Rainville, our library department head, and say, do you know of big things that are different? Or
Right.
can you look at this and from a services standpoint, guide us in some kind of a direction, or, whatever.
And I'm looking at your, so I've got two screens. I'm looking at your list of questions here. And I feel like, the goal of this is to look for efficiency and stuff, but I'm just so curious at the wide ranges too, that like, I'm so like, what is Concord doing? Are they offering babysitting? Like, what?
I think they have 3 branches for the record.
Oh.
Concord has 3 separate branches. There's that information in the hours. So
Okay.
kind of, yep.
3 branches. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why,
Okay.
when I computed an average, I was like, for some of these departments, oh my God, I mean, it goes from some of these towns are spending like, $26 per resident in Drake-It. And then you've got, is Concord the highest? Yeah, to 138. It's kind of crazy.
Wow.
I think it is a little,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I think it is a little interesting that like when Amy did her number of hours, that we're on the low end, like that's sort of interesting to me.
Well,
I don't understand.
I also want to recognize, and I've been in Concord's library, I've been in some other libraries in Chelmsford. Westford is a unique style with lots of different sections, right? One would think they would need staff to kind of fit in each of those areas. So that's one reason why perhaps there's not really a central location in that library like there might be in Chelmsford, right? So the downstairs needs its own. I think that might add to the staffing issues, but that's just a guess.
Like the building infrastructure creates the need for additional staff, perhaps.
Yeah.
Because you have to have somebody in the downstairs. And then I would also imagine that you might want 2 people in that downstairs, so that I just imagine that could be a piece of it.
So, I mean, do we want to are there any other questions that we think Ellen could maybe answer for us, or do the questions that I have kind of suffice? Like I was envisioning giving every department head those top questions that are sort of generic, and then their specific area of questions.
For the library specifically, we might want to ask, will anything change when the new library comes online? So like Amy was saying, for staffing specific areas based upon the architecture of our library, will anything change? Also, I know that hours of operation are dependent upon population. So as we see Westford's population grow, we need to increase the hours. I think if we go above 25,000 population, we have to increase the hours, so that will increase staffing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that those are some library specific questions that I'm thinking about.
Okay. So I added, will there be changes in staffing / expenses with the new library?
So your first bullet with the list, is that just ones that spent less than us? Or what made you pick those? I'm trying to, my eyes are trying to dart around right now to.
It's been a while, probably. So Acton, what do I have on the list there?
I think those were the 3 that you identified as within 15% of our population.
Yeah, so I think initially these were just, these were really more of a, who is spending less than us, but has
Comparable
roughly our population. I mean, Chelmsford is not, but I sort of kept Acton and Chelmsford on all of the lists because they're on our schools list, they're on our towns list. they're geographically close to us. And I think I'd share this with some people. I asked a real estate agent that I know in town, like what other, when people are looking at homes and they're looking in Westford, where else are they looking? And Acton and Chelmsford was on that list as well. So that's really why I kind of kept Acton and Chelmsford on pretty much
Okay.
all of our department lists. Open for debate. That was just my thinking. At this point, I can't really remember why I picked Burlington, to be quite honest. It could just be because they were spending less than us. But they're a much bigger town that may not really, that may not be valid.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think as far as the towns that were, let me look back and see. Can you, where is it? Are you seeing different spreadsheets as I scroll through this?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
a different one, okay. So, oh, and I can't get this to. So the 3 towns that met the plus or minus, the plus or minus population numbers to ours, and plus or minus 15% per capita income. The only ones that hit both of those targets were Acton, Reading, and Westboro. And I figured that out after I did my initial look at who do we want to look at for the library. And didn't go back to, I think Reading is actually spending more than us. I don't know if we want to add that or not. What are your thoughts on the towns?
Your first question about whether to add Reading or not, I feel like if you're going to ask them, if they flag for another department or two, then I think we could just add them to the list. Like add the library question to our existing list. But if library is the only, oh, sorry. So you're saying, but for population and per capita, they're comparable. And so do we just reach out and learn something from them no matter what? But they're spending more than us in library.
Right. So
Got it.
Acton, Reading, and Westboro were the only 3 out of that list that that hit the plus or minus population and plus or minus per capita. Maybe I don't know if there's other things to look at. If we do, we may not get any more towns on the list. Like I initially started with plus or minus 10%. And I think maybe 1 town hit both. So it's hard to figure that out.
I think I do support the thinking about who matches us closely for those, because you could look at any kind of data, right? But to say who's comparable to us. But when something that dawned on me as I was going through the school data was some of these things I'm comparing or analyzing are outcomes of funding, and some of them determine the funding, right? So
Okay.
your per capita and your population are sort of factors that turn into your budget, right? So it's kind of like I think in the Hingham one, they do some analysis where they try to determine ability to pay, right? A community's ability to pay when they're talking about an override or not. And I feel like I landed on, that's interesting to me because I want to know who has our similar makeup and our similar ability to pay, and then see what choices are they making, not just who's spending less than us because they might have a different sort of makeup of their funding.
Yep.
But don't ask me to repeat that because I could probably change it halfway through.
And I think that's kind of where I was going with some of this too, is I
Yeah.
sort of looked at who was spending less than us for the library. But Franklin was sort of interesting. It was Drake that I was like, well, I just don't know that we're going to get that much information from them So I didn't put them on the list.
Like there's like, again, I found this through some of the school stuff. There's like a curiosity list of questions I have. You know, like Concord would be on a curiosity list of questions for me to be like, what are you guys doing? I'm impressed, and what are you offering your residents? But when I think about, like, obviously the goal and the charge of this group, I think it's, to me, solidifies more around looking at towns that are similar to us and have the same means as us, and what choices are they making, what trade-offs are they making within those same means.
Right. So do we think that this list does it? The only one I'm kind of questioning now is Burlington. I think their population is quite a bit higher than ours.
It's actually less than ours. They have just
Oh.
a higher commercial population. So if you go to the US Census tab, or the first, that has the census data has the population. I'm pretty sure that Burlington's population is smaller, but their commercial base is much
Oh, yeah.
higher. Actually, they're about
Okay.
the same in population.
Yeah. It must have been their per capita income that bumped them off of our like similar list here.
I guess to circle back or close that question out, to me, I would consider Acton, Reading, and Westboro valuable to interview, regardless of how their department spending lines up to ours necessarily.
Yep. Yeah, so maybe we're consistent with those three across all of them, and then pick out
Yeah,
others.
if they're like our sister towns, sort of, right, then, and maybe we don't learn a whole lot from them or have any sort of specific things, but I just think for consistency's sake that we're saying they are the same, similar makeup to us.
Okay.
And what choices are they making, or what are they working on?
I also think that it leaves us from choosing things based on the numbers that we see that we can't know if they're the same, that we're comparing same budgets, I guess. So that helps set that aside.
Yeah, like the makeup, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so if we add Reading to our library list and leave all the other ones, is that what we're saying? Or are there anything here that we want to, any of the towns we want to remove? So we've got Acton, Burlington, Chelmsford, Reading, Shrewsbury, Sudbury, Westboro.
Yeah, I think that looks.
And then it was going to kind of, I didn't add another question of, if there are other towns that do something different that you think we could learn from, let us know about that, sort of as a, if Ellen knows of some other town that compares better for whatever reason that she thinks.
Yeah, I think that's a good general question to add to the top of the list.
Okay. Are we happy with those questions? Do we want anything else? So here.
It would just be interesting, I think, to see sort of, I assume like when you think personnel is pretty consistent year to year, I would assume. I'm just wondering about expenses. Like they just vary so wildly, even with sort of similar other numbers, that like what could be in there? Like, is somebody buying a bunch of new books one year and then they don't the next year, or is it stable over a couple of years? I mean, I guess that's kind of a question for Ellen to just understand what she puts into that bucket, and then thinking about whether those are like how consistent that is, I guess. I'm still just reflecting on the range. Like it's surprising to me to see numbers so different.
Right.
my other question is the other revenue in here, or is this just from the town budget? Like the Friends of the Library, they have their own fund. There's different organizations that sponsor different programs. Is this in this budget, or is that a separate? Okay, so I guess those are questions that's
Yeah.
a question that I would ask. What things are funded by external sources?
Organizations, yeah.
So there's like the Friends of the Library. I'm certain the book sale probably is a piece of that, and then, but other towns, they may have. You have a town like Concord with the type of history and
Right. Maybe they have
literary association. There could just be
Mhm.
some other types of money coming from other types of places, but
yeah, that's a good question.
You're right, that could actually, in some of these cases, could be offsetting their budget, and that's why they're spending less than us, or
Right.
that's why they're able to provide more.
Yep. Great idea. Is that on
Okay.
is that on the, so are these separated out yet, not by internal and external, or
So
just
right
just that
now,
I think, yeah,
right now I was thinking these questions are internal, but they certainly could be turned into external after we talk to our department heads. I kind of hadn't thought that far yet to the
Okay.
external.
I just want to make note that I think that answers to that last question would be interesting for both.
Yeah.
Our and elsewhere. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Okay. Library complete. Should we move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay. Recreation. This was another one that was wildly all over the place and then not. So again, same kind of thing, the number of FTEs, blah, blah, blah. This color coding on the budget. So the green, well, let me back up a sec. So our recreation department is run with an enterprise fund, which means that, and Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, but for the most part, it's one of those things that is run. You separate out the expenses into an enterprise when it's a little bit more of a service type of a thing, and you're trying to have the users specifically pay for those services versus like police that everybody uses.
Yeah.
So ours is an enterprise fund. All of the towns in green do not do an enterprise fund. They just use a revolving fund to pay for their expenses and their programming and stuff like that. The blue are the other enterprise funds. So it's us, Lexington, and Concord. And what I noticed right away was Lexington and Concord, we are not even in the same league. Like they have, I think Concord has a pool and I don't even know, like they're just at a totally different level than our recreation department. Same with Lexington. I don't remember exactly, but it was just like, enormous. Versus ours that really in programming, at least from what I could tell, is more like the other towns that just do a revolving fund. So for whatever that's worth. Again, the net cost per the net costs per resident, where I could find revenue, I did a net cost. In some of these, I couldn't figure out what the revenue was, or like with Acton and a lot of these towns, what they said was, it sounded like the number that's in that FY24 budget is what they spend every year on those X number of employees. Everything else comes out of a revolving fund and is paid for out of that revolving fund. So none of it hits the general fund budget. Whereas ours, it varies. Sometimes it can hit the general fund higher or lower. It's not consistent from year to year.
Christine, can you talk about the Westford line budget and revenue for us? So we take 2.4 million to run ours. Are those added together? Like,
No,
oh, okay.
it's this is budget, this is revenue. So we're sort of running at a deficit of $10.77 per resident. So if you take,
So we're offsetting some of our recreation
Yeah.
programming from the general fund at this point in time. It's not optimal, but that's what's happening for fiscal 24.
Why can't I grasp this? So 1.3 million is in our general fund to pay for recreation department.
No.
No,
no, it's not. It's for this, because we're an enterprise fund, it's the difference between these two. Valerie. It's the difference between the 1.3 and the
200,000,
1.3.
200,000-ish is in our general fund budget for
Yes.
recreation.
Yep, I think it's
We
like
received-
236 or something.
Okay, we received the 1.1 million.
To offset some of
revenue.
this 1.3 million expenses.
Okay. And Kristen, you were saying what's not optimal? That ideally they would match the numbers?
Exactly. They should
Okay.
match. But you'll see that Concord and Lexington do not match. So it looks like there's probably some offsets there as well from the general
Yeah,
fund.
Well, so Concord had a note that said that they had retained earnings to make up that difference. So there was actually zero cost to the
Okay.
general fund. Lexington, let's see if revenue offsets this whole amount, another retained earnings, user charges. There is a general fund subsidy for their community center of $256K. Which hopefully that is what adds up. How do I stop this?
can I ask what the benefit or the drawback to an enterprise fund versus a revolving fund is? Is there a financial benefit from using an enterprise fund?
That's above my knowledge. Yeah, I sort of question that too. Sometimes I think there is in other cases, like
For water and like water sewer has
right.
enterprise, so that the users of the water system pay into it, and that fund goes directly to the water system. So we couldn't take those funds to use in any other area. So, but when you do set up aside a revolving fund, you have to limit the amount that comes in at town meeting every year. So you could only, take in up to $250,000, for example, or spend out $250,000. The enterprise fund doesn't have a limit of what can be brought in or spent in a year.
And so in theory, if you bring in more than you spent, that could stay.
Right, it could stay in that
Could
enterprise
stay.
fund and roll over for the
Wonderful.
next year. Correct.
Okay, so that sounds like it's a benefit. Okay, thank you.
The one thing, just stepping away from the numbers a little bit in recreation and going more towards programming, is what I've seen during my short time here is that I'm not sure other communities have a road and bush type of opportunity like we do. Also, I'm not familiar with a lot of recreation programs running the after school program. I'm familiar with the town school department running the after school program. So those are two unique things that I've noticed in Westford. I don't know if the other towns that we're comparing to for recreation offer those opportunities or don't.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that in the school budgets that I've been looking at. And yeah.
So I suppose recreation is a very broad term and another difficult thing to compare, because if a lot of it, what we're providing is services, whereas other towns are actual recreation facilities that are open to the general public. So this might be a tough one to really compare, I think.
Yeah, and to like apply learnings to, right? Like, I mean, I see, I'm checking your list right now of who to call or who to, yeah. And I almost think it might be like, well, depending on what our internal interview reveals, I almost think you want to try to match service level. And that's hard to do just by looking at the numbers.
It's impossible to do just by looking at the numbers, right?
Right.
The only things yeah.
So again,
Well,
I guess I would just say Reading, Acton, Westboro to start with, like these towns we've decided are similar to us. What are they doing for our recreation, for their recreation? And then, oh yeah, I said Acton, okay.
Yeah, I don't know that anything outside of that would be worth our time on the
Although
limited.
I guess it would be interesting to speak to one or two, like for the curiosity bucket of people who are sort of evening out, or and learn about sort of how they're set up and why they are like how they're making their revenue equal their expenses. Does that make sense? Or like what they're offering that's popular, that's bringing in the
Yeah.
fund, or
And I
that
think
could be
those
an
are-
internal question too, like, right, maybe somebody knows in Westford, somebody knows, well, oh, if we offered this, if we had the structure to offer this thing.
Yeah, again, I think the ones that end up netting out to zero are like Concord and Lexington, that are just huge. They have some big rec facility of some kind that, which I mean, we don't even have a facility. I guess one of the issues that I have with the way our rec department works is, it's set up like an enterprise fund, but it doesn't always work as an enterprise fund, it seems like, in the sense that it's paying for itself, or it's, moving towards paying for itself. And in the last few years, granted, there was COVID and there were some things that were beyond control. But over the last few years, I think we've supplemented their budget like $1 million. Because of the way it's run, because it's an enterprise fund, if they're not going to make the revenue that they anticipate, the town has to come in and fill in that gap. And that's what happened like 3 years. Again, it was COVID and post-COVID, so hopefully we're moving away from that. But
Is that you're talking about that, what is it called, Department of Revenue has to like certify it or
yes.
something like that?
Yeah,
I wonder
before we
if
get
that doesn't apply to a revolving fund.
it, as far as I know, it does not, right, Kristen? I mean,
Yeah.
that wouldn't, yeah.
Right, the revolving fund gets baked into your overall general budget review with DOR and free cash and all of that. So it's not looked at the same as an enterprise account.
Yes, DOR need to certify and retain earning for enterprise fund. And exactly that's why I feel it seems like we don't have enough reserve in our enterprise fund to offset. And we should have enough revenue to cover the total expenditure if we are spending. It says here 263,000 that's coming from general fund to subsidize the deficit. It's like a huge portion. So does that mean we don't have enough, like we don't charge our residents enough rate to cover the total expenditure? That's something we can think about.
I
Could
think
be.
additionally, this is another case of where they're getting external funding as well. And I don't know if that's considered inside the revenue, right? So the organization that I work with will sponsor some things through the rec department and give funding through there. So that's how much that happens. I'm not sure, but it helps offset the cost for lower income families to attend some of these programs. So are those numbers in there in some capacity? Is maybe that where the deficit is coming from? Because there's that opportunity for a lower fee for people who have a need. Maybe that, I don't know if those are all questions, maybe that should be added. And where else is money coming from? Are those numbers included in the revenue if other organizations are contributing?
Usually the Friends of Library, the revenue doesn't come into our general funds operating budget or the enterprise fund. That's completely separate, like a private organization. So the revenue doesn't come into the town.
So it wouldn't show. So if we sponsored some campers, that wouldn't show on this budget at all?
Usually not, but I'm not sure like for other towns.
And I hear you. I think as across the board, that is a good question to ask about. Is there anything that's not captured here, right? But from the rec department side of things, that the expense for that kid is still being met, right? Because of the lower fee, but of the subsidy from an external organization, they're still receiving the full amount, right?
So in theory, there's some of that, but do they
Okay.
still offer that and they cover that on their own too? I'm not sure how much of that is happening.
Okay. That's true too, because you just reminded me too that like the after school program, I think, can use the reduced lunch application. Is that what that's called? Like the eligibility for but that process bumps you into a lower fee for some of these things.
Yes.
Oh. Okay, that's a good question.
Maybe like a percentage of how much of users are participating at a reduced fee.
Mhm. So, do we want to remove some of the towns from this list to have Michelle look at? Because I think there's quite a few now. I mean, definitely Acton, Reading, and Westboro. Yeah, Chelmsford.
I was gonna say Chelmsford because they're just so close by
Yeah,
and
Yep.
they're lower than us. I mean, I don't, aside from curiosity, I don't know if we're gonna learn anything from Wellesley.
yeah. I threw Wellesley in there every so often just as a high
It's
mark.
like
of
that curiosity,
okay,
right?
Yeah.
But
but we can although it was still interesting to me that they capped their, well, I guess they did. Yeah, so let me get rid of that one. I mean, maybe Stoneham, not.
yeah, I just don't know enough about that makeup or you know, to like, and they're kind of
Right.
pretty far away. Okay.
I guess we can.
I mean, I wouldn't lose sleep over losing some more of these.
Okay.
Just to make it manageable for someone to fill out, right? We'd rather some responses.
Yeah.
So like North
right.
Andover and Franklin, maybe.
Yeah, let's get rid of North Andover.
Or maybe I don't know how much. Yeah, that's fine.
Is everyone good with that list? So Acton, Chelmsford, Franklin can stay or go. Reading, Shrewsbury, Westboro.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think, I don't know that I have many questions, but basically just comparing those to see maybe
I've
what
got the
types of-
questions up on another screen if
Okay.
that's helpful. So for recreation, that's all you have is towns to compare.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you feel like adding on to that, Valerie, and
Yep.
I guess just some kind of a, comparing programming across those, and then the other revenue question.
Maybe the percentage of the reduced fee
Thanks.
services.
Yeah, and how that's reflected, who's paying for that kind of.
And I do think, we talk about that, those numbers not matching, though having to be over subsidized more in the last couple of years, but I wonder if that's correlated to the increase in the low income housing that we received. If any of those pieces, right? If we're seeing more reduced services in that piece, or if it's just people aren't utilizing it.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean,
I sort of worry about the overhead. Like we've got 12. I wanted to ask about the 12 FTEs. Like, are those seriously like 12 consistent employees that we're paying their salary for, regardless of how many people sign up for any particular program? Or
that's really
any of the
depends. It's also
benefits?
we run our after school program in so many different sites, and they all need a site director at each location. So that's a huge thing. I was talking with Michelle the other day just about, you know, do we need all these sites and the cost of busing kids from one site to another to run a program with more people? So that could be a question of alternatives that we're going to keep if we're going to keep the after school program because of those high FTE levels.
Yeah. I mean, I know they're not running the middle school program anymore, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We'll just stop this stuff here. Yeah. And I know, I mean, we took a big dip because I think, well, I assume that people figured out that they could get a little bit more work done with their kid home for 2 hours after school, instead of paying for that service.
Yeah. That might be another, well, in Michelle's sort of comparing programming, maybe specifically asking about any sort of after school care, like what other towns actually do that. Okay. I'm thinking what we can do as far as these questions is to send them ahead of time to the department heads, let them kind of think about them, answer in an email if they'd like, and then we can set up a follow-up, Zoom type of meeting to kind of talk about them in case there's other things or we need to get clarification on anything.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I think we're good on recreation. Chris, I know you're gonna have to leave soon, but
Do you find this helpful, Christina, for your question?
I certainly do, and it's nice to have other people looking at it so that it's not just me. And no, there's definitely been some good things that I didn't think about. So this is great.
I'm happy to
Health-
continue.
Okay, I mean I can continue too. Health department. Again, those didn't vary as widely, but some of the things that I did find were like some towns, and I'm going to blank on which ones. I think Shrewsbury and maybe Wellesley were part of like a regional health department that I thought was sort of interesting. This wasn't one of the things that was regionalized as much as some other departments, but there was some regionalization going on.
I thought Kristen explained Shrewsbury was attached to UMass, right? Or
No, so that's the ambulance service in
Oh, I'm sorry.
Shrewsbury. But Shrewsbury is part of a regional health district, with Worcester being the lead community. So they purchase their health services through the city of Worcester.
Okay.
I mean, I think that would be a big leap for us to look at.
We're already doing some, I would say, and Amy helped me with this, shared services for health. We have a grant through Mass Department of Public Health that the town of Westford is the lead community. That's where we have our one of our other community wellness coordinators, Brittany Nash, who's working with Acton, Drakeit, and one other community. And we also have some other shared services through that grant. So I think we're doing a mini hybrid of that at this point in time.
Remind me the title of that position again. That's not the community wellness coordinator.
No. So Nicole Laviolette is the community wellness coordinator strictly for the town of Westford. But Brittany Nash is also a regional community wellness coordinator for 4 communities, including Westford.
Thank you. I don't know why I can't seem to keep those straight.
Me either. I can't either. It's not just you. So
these FTEs at least look pretty well matched, which is nice to see.
Yep. Again, except for Wellesley, which is completely just out in left field with 12 people.
I mean, what are they doing?
I don't know. I had them highlighted, but now I'm thinking, is it even worth it? Because they're just, again, their budget's like double ours, and it's crazy to even have them in this list. Like, I keep going back to, after this is all over, after the budget task force, like at some point, I think we need one list to use across the entire town,
right.
School and and town, and it needs to be updated because Wellesley just has no business being here at all. It's just,
And I have some school data if we get to it, but you're right. Like, I mean, I've started almost ignoring Wellesley, Concord, Carlisle. Needham is on the school list and tends to just be way up there too. And
Yeah.
it's like, again, I think that's what helped me narrow down to not comparing with a town just because of, I don't know, enrollment only, but more like, do they have the same tools? Like, are we all starting with the same tool set? Like, toolkit?
yeah. So maybe we try to move a little bit quicker through. So the health department, one of my concerns, and I don't know if I put this on the questions yet or not, but I know the health department over the last few years has talked about going for accreditation or going for something. I forget what the wording is. But I don't really understand what that means. And, are there dollars attached to that we're signing up for? So just sort of a question on the direction that they're going.
Yeah, I think that they were talking about accreditation. That's to national standards to make sure that you're running your inspections to a national standard. All of your forms are to a national standard, that you're running certain programs to a national standard. It does cost money to be accredited and to go through the accreditation process. I think accreditation is every 3 or 4 years to get reaccredited. So those would be questions to ask Ray. She's a step back a little bit from that. I don't know what the Board of Health's standpoint is, so I don't want to speak for them, but they're really looking to do this community health assessment to get baseline data on how to run our programs for our town and provide the best preventative services as well as reactive services. So that's a lot of information I just threw out there, but just wanted to clarify that a little bit.
Yeah. So maybe it's a combination of asking Ray, maybe we need to ask the Board of Health as well, but I'm sort of curious about that whole process. And I'd just like to know upfront, what are they signing us up for? How much is that going to be dollars wise?
You also have down, so for list towns to compare, you have Acton, Chelmsford, Franklin, Wellesley, and Westboro. So we're gonna remove Wellesley from that one.
Yeah.
And add Reading.
Yes.
So that's great because you already have Acton and Westboro. So I think that's validating. You also have Acton has a nursing services department for vaccination clinics. They charge for some of these services. Could Westford consider something like this?
Yeah, I thought that was sort of an interesting little thing that they had.
So I'm going to pop off, but if anybody needs to reach me with questions, I'll check this sheet when I get back tomorrow, and happy to touch base with anybody in advance of Wednesday.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.
I mean, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but if we need to adjourn, and if Amy and Jenny, if you guys have stops or conflicts, please speak up and let us know, and we could always adjourn. And Christine and I can keep going.
I can go another 15 minutes. But...
Okay. All right. Let's see.
Okay.
So you also had, how are the various wellness and outreach positions working together? Is there overlap or not? So I think understanding the
Right. And some of my reasoning behind that is that, and I don't remember which is which, but there's a social worker that I think actually works for the Council on Aging. Then there's the regional coordinator that is directed by the health department, I believe. And then there's the community wellness person that's technically under Kristen. So how do those three positions sort of fit together, and are they fitting together? And what I saw other towns had like they had a couple different things, but one was like a youth and elder services that actually combined like all of that outreach for, any age in their entire town. And there are a lot of social work type positions and kind of outreach stuff like that, but they were all kind of collected somewhere. Anyway, so that was that. So I don't know if we have any other stuff, or are we ready to go on to Council on Aging?
Yeah, I think health department looks a little bit more sort of status quo to me. I mean, it'd be great to understand efficiency, some possible efficiencies, but we don't seem like we're out in left field, I guess.
I don't think right now we're out in left field. Again, I kind of want to figure out, I mean, the other thing is that some of those other outreach positions that I talked about are not in this budget,
Oh, right. Are they
you
ARPA?
know? They're, well, some ARPA, some is just in the town, it's in the town manager's budget, or it's in the council on aging budget. Like, it's a little, it's a little shifted.
Got it. So it's not, we don't feel like it's a good capture of
It
all of our health services.
it may not be, and again, depending on how these other towns do it, again, this, our $19 per resident might not really match very well with some of these others, like Acton's a lot lower, but they have that whole other nursing department, which I kind of want to ask them. I forget what the budget was, but they talk about charging people for these services. So is the net cost zero? Is it very low? It's, they may be sort of paying for their vaccination clinics out of that in a way, the time that we're not.
Yep. Okay, I've captured that.
Okay, so Council on Aging. So we're at like $25, which, if the average is 18 per resident.
Wow.
Again, for the most part, the range, if you throw out Lexington, the range isn't too ridiculous, except Andover's a little high too, as far as total budget. I didn't do an average number of FTEs. I mean, the RFTs are 6, so that doesn't seem too outrageous. I think it was more the spending seemed maybe a little bit higher than some other ones.
I was just realizing, so you didn't do personnel versus expenses for all of them, right?
I
Okay,
didn't.
Okay, no, not.
Oh, well,
I was trying to figure out
so
what was different for COA. From the
I
last
did in
one.
this sense. I mean, I have personnel and expenses on the Council on Aging.
Okay. Yeah, I think your list looks.
I added Reading to the list.
You have Acton, Chelmsford, Shrewsbury, Wellesley, Westboro.
So I added Reading. Should we again knock Wellesley out of there? Or, I mean, they're actually, the thing that I thought was interesting here is that Wellesley's actually spending less than we are.
Huh. I guess we could see how it shakes out if it's the only questions we're sending them. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I guess, yeah, I guess, and this was more just for our department heads first.
Okay.
Before we decide which town.
Sorry,
so
yep.
why don't we leave Wellesley in this case? Because I do think that's sort of interesting, where they clearly have more money to spend and they're not. So why?
So I think some service related questions. How many seniors do we serve? What do other towns do for transportation? Are our fees comparable? How will the Westford Transportation Revolving Fund be used? What is the potential revenue? And again, the outreach question, like the overlap staffing. Yeah, nothing jumps out at me here.
Okay. I mean, the other things that might be different in some of these towns, which I kind of stopped going to these different levels, is we have a senior center. I think a lot of these places do, but they may not all have a building.
I think from when I collected hours, they all have some kind of something.
Okay.
So I do have those hours somewhere. Additionally, is something that's a little bit unique with us is that our food pantry is housed in the senior center, which could add an increase of staff and management.
That's a good. is the food pantry eventually moving to that town farm road development? Anyone know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about. I first thought is that's so far out that
Yeah.
I mean, no progress, nothing noticeable to me is started at that, although we did move
Yeah.
the training facility, I guess. Yeah, I remember hearing that though, but I
Yep.
don't know an update.
Right, but that's sort of interesting with the food pantry. I wonder if that does add anything, or if it's just our programming. And I'm not, I'm not saying we need to take
Close it.
away
Yeah.
anything. But it would just, I think it's interesting to note. And then like my vision for a lot of this is, we sort of put these things out there like, okay, we're different. We offer this.
Yes, yes.
Do we still want to offer that? And here's an approximate dollar figure attached to it. If it's worth it, great. We're still going to offer it because Westford wants to do that. But if not,
I agree.
here's a difference, and here's the choice to make.
Right. It's about sort of the education and the conscious choices that we may need to start making, right?
Right.
And arming everybody with the same information.
Yep.
Definitely.
Okay.
I just looked at Amy's hour sheet, and the average hours is about 40 and Westford is at 48. But
Okay. That would be good information. I'll include that information to the department heads too. I was going to give them like a snapshot of this spreadsheet plus the hours, if it makes sense for that department, just so they have the same information we're looking at.
Yeah, I would say we're the only one more than us is Wellesley.
But on Council on Aging, and yet they're spending less than us.
Mm-hmm. They're open 7 hours every day. We are open 8, 12, 8, 12, 8. So they're open Saturday and Sunday, and we are not.
I am curious though, is how this is all categorized, because if I look up Council on Aging, sometimes Council on Aging is merely a board that meets and once a month for issues. It's sort of more governing type of situation. That's kind of what I find when I look at Council on Aging. And so I loop over to whatever, the senior center pieces, and that's how I got those hours. So I don't know that. No, I'm just not sure how this budget is. Is that reflective of their senior hours, or is that reflective of their board? I'm not sure.
For the hours, do you mean, or the budget?
The budget piece, right? So if Wellesley's, I'm sure it's not, but I don't know that would encompass all of the things. Maybe the senior center falls in somewhere different. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I totally hear what you're saying. I tried to look through and to pick out all of the senior center stuff, or to find their whatever they called it. So they may not have called it Council on Aging, but I listed it that way because that's what we call it. So I did try to capture the actual expenses. I certainly may have missed something or made a mistake, but it is attempting to capture all of those expenses.
No, that's good to know.
Thanks for saying that, because that reminds me too that this is another great department to say, what other funding are you receiving?
Yeah,
right? 'Cause there's the boutique that they have, and donations and stuff.
and they have a Friends of Cameron or something, right? Too. Yeah, that's another good one. They also get grants too. They get some sort of LRTA grant for their transportation, and there may be other things. That was another thing that as I was looking through some of these budgets, I really love the way some of the towns for each department, when they were specifying their budget, they also had like a revenue section that listed any grants, any outside anything. Sometimes they used it to offset their expenses, sometimes they didn't. But it was just nice to see, because it just kind of, I don't know, put pieces together.
Yeah, I think the more budgets we look at, we could come up with some suggestions or recommendations for just simple stuff too. Because I mean, I've been making notes of some on the school side, sometimes another district will word something the right, like, not that there's a right way, but like a different way that like either makes
Yeah,
like it just speaks to some of the nuances about like circuit breaker, or about like this is, you know, the difference
Right.
between like level services or level funding, or what's the, what do we call it, the cost of increment for like just our staff to like roll over another year without any you know, cost of living increase. So some of those things I think could be really valuable as we pull them out, to think about just budget process improvements.
Yeah, I have a little list going like that I've noticed too. All right, let's move on to police.
Okay, no questions here, just a list of towns to compare.
Yeah,
I'll add Reading while you start. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was really at a loss with the police because I just I can't comprehend really how their day-to-day works. Like, I'm just not familiar with any of, so I just had a really hard time figuring out what do we ask and what, you know, what goes on. We're a little bit above the average per resident spend. You know, I don't know what that really tells us. You know, maybe we're high on the number of officers, but I have no, like, I just have no clue.
It would be good, like a reminder through this, of that population recommendation from, I think it was like from the 80s. It was referenced, do you know what I'm talking about? When I feel like our staffing level for a couple years ago was
Oh.
matching our population from the 80s,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
hadn't grown to, you know, 2020's population. So it would be cool to look up what that guideline or recommendation is and almost check it against what we have collected here for FTE over for every 1,000 residents, and see if there are some departments, maybe there are some departments who are consciously under it and are just saying we can't do anything about it, or we're fine.
Right.
Or I wonder too if, like, it would be great, I'm just going to make a note of this, if they, I don't know, in this ideal world, if these department heads do any sort of organic benchmarking, like, do they track how many calls they get versus another town, or, you know, yeah,
Right.
like you said, just to give any sort of context to the department.
I have to imagine a lot of them in preparing their budgets and looking for increases are seeking out like-minded communities. I think it's a really great question to ask. You know, it will help support their request for increases or staff additions.
Mhm.
And
Another thing that I noticed in some of the budgets was not like, so for each department, they also had like sort of a block of statistics for that particular department, which was really interesting to see. So like for police, they had, you know, number of calls, number of accidents they responded to. I don't even remember what some of the other things were, but it was just sort of nice to give like context to, okay, this is the budget, this is how many people, this is the type of stuff they're responding to. And if they didn't have it there, you could certainly look back in history and see, are their number of calls increasing? Are there a number of traffic stops? You know, whatever, that kind of stuff.
yeah, that you raise a good point, because usually there's a sentence or two of, or a couple sentences of narrative, right, with the budget request. So
Yeah.
I think a great question to ask would be, you know, community outreach programming that they do. And then are there other grants or external funding that supports that? I know that the fire department does a whole lot of things with the Christmas trees, and I know that's a fundraiser for them as well. I don't know. The police are at the schools from time to time. So what percentage of that is community outreach? And are there external revenue or sources?
great, capture those.
I'm sorry, I may need to pop off, and I need to make sure the payroll wrap up correctly. So,
No problem, Jenny. Thank
okay,
you.
all right, bye-bye.
I've got to go
Jenny,
wrangle
bye.
some kids
Okay,
too.
right,
I
well,
will see you all.
Let's take a vote
Yeah.
to adjourn then, right? Oh,
Oh.
Did Jenny go? Okay, well, that's the,
Okay.
are we still a quorum?
Nah, technically I'm not.
I think you
Oh,
can
shoot.
vote if nobody's here though, and Vibu is not here, so I think you can vote. Because you're
Okay,
an
There we go.
alternate.
I'm
That's
just
what I
gonna-
hear.
I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn officially.
Second,
I thought,
Sorry, I'm trying to type it and say it at the same time, green seconds. And it is 1:41 PM. All in favor of adjourning, and I will stop the recording. Chris, oh, we can't. I don't have a. oh. Okay,
you're
sorry,
a co-host. You should be able to.
Amy, go ahead, and we'll figure this out. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you.
yeah, are we still
Yes.
recording?
We need to stop it. It says permission needed from meeting host. Ask Christina Green to permission to. I don't have a stop recording button. I just have a
Oh.
record.
No, I have stop video. Pause share, annotate. Oh, it looks like I can stop recording. She must have made me host.
Okay, all right. So we are adjourning at 1:41.
So I'm gonna stop.